The sound of tearing paper was louder than a gunshot in the silent war room. One sharp, violent rip that echoed off the reinforced concrete walls, followed by the soft, rustling whisper of falling debris. Commander Rax, a man built like a tank and possessing the emotional density of a bunker wall, held the mission logs Alara Vance had spent 3 hours compiling. With a sneer that didn't quite reach his cold, calculating eyes, he let the confetti of shredded classified paper rain down on her head. The white strips fluttered through the recycled air, landing in her hair, on her shoulders, and covering the keyboard of her laptop like snow. "Congratulations," Rax barked, his voice booming through the enclosed space. "You are now Lieutenant Confetti. That is the only rank a paper pusher like you deserves." 15 elite operators laughed. It was a guttural, ugly sound, a chorus of men who believed they owned the world because they carried the weapons that shaped it. Alara didn't flinch. She didn't brush the paper off her shoulder. She sat perfectly still in her corner chair, her fingers resting on her laptop keyboard, not trembling, but waiting. Her posture was not one of submission, though to the untrained eye, it certainly looked that way. It was the stillness of a predator waiting for the wind to shift. Rax leaned in, invading her personal space, smelling of stale coffee and arrogance. "What is the matter, scribe? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just waiting for us to do the real work while you type your little diary?" He kicked the leg of her chair. Hard. "Get out! You are breathing my air." Alara looked up. Her eyes were not the eyes of a scared secretary. They were the eyes of someone watching a structural support beam slowly crack under too much weight. She did not pick up her bag. She did not leave. Instead, she reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a single, crimson-red envelope sealed with black wax. "I am not writing a diary, Commander," she said, her voice dropping the room temperature by 10 degrees. "I am writing to your court-martial." Rax laughed. It was a loud, barking sound that encouraged his men to join in, but 10 seconds later, when he saw what was inside that envelope, he would forget how to breathe. The room, known officially as the Tactical Operations Center but universally called the War Room, was buried 50 feet beneath the scorched earth of the base. It was a claustrophobic box of steel and screens, illuminated by the cool blue glow of monitors and the harsh fluorescent strips overhead. The air was always recycled, tasting faintly of ozone and floor polish. This was where decisions were made that ended lives halfway across the world. At the center of the room stood the tactical table, a massive digital surface displaying a high-resolution satellite feed of a remote valley. Around it sat the strike team. They were the apex predators of the military ecosystem, men who moved through the night and left silence in their wake. And at the head of the table stood Commander Rax. He was charismatic in the way a cult leader is charismatic, drawing people in with confidence and keeping them there with fear. Alara sat in the shadows of the corner, the designated mission scribe. Her job, on paper, was to document the timeline of the operation, log communications, and ensure the paperwork matched the reality. In practice, she was furniture. She was invisible. She was the person you ignored until you needed someone to blame for a clerical error. Rax turned his back on her, dismissing her threat as the desperate bluff of a civilian. He tapped the digital table, zooming in on a cluster of buildings in the valley. "Listen up," he commanded, his voice shifting into briefing mode. "Operation Viper Strike is a go. Intel confirms the target location. We are looking at a localized insurgency cell hoarding munitions. We go in hard, we neutralize the threat, and we secure the assets." Alara's fingers flew across her keyboard. Click, clack, click, clack. To the men in the room, it was just background noise, the sound of a secretary doing her busy work. But Alara wasn't just typing minutes. She was cross-referencing. She was pulling data from the secure server, overlaying Rax's briefing with the raw intelligence reports that he thought were buried under 3 layers of encryption. The intel on her screen painted a different picture. There were no munitions in that valley. There was no insurgency cell. The assets Rax mentioned were crates of gold bullion, stolen from a national reserve during the last coup and hidden by a warlord who was now dead. Rax wasn't planning a counter-terror raid. He was planning a bank robbery, and he was using the United States military to do it. From the shadows near the communications array, Lieutenant Kale watched. He was the comms officer, a man who spoke little and saw everything. He stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of professional detachment. He caught Rax's eye and nodded when given an order, but his gaze kept drifting to Alara. He saw the paper in her hair. He saw the stillness of her hands. He saw the way she breathed, a rhythmic, controlled cycle that had nothing to do with typing and everything to do with combat stress management. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out. Kyle adjusted a frequency knob on his console, his movements subtle. He wasn't just tuning the radio, he was opening a backdoor channel, a dedicated uplink that bypassed Rax's monitoring protocols and connected directly to Alara's laptop. It was a digital lifeline, a way to whisper without speaking. Rax continued his performance. We hit the perimeter at 0200 hours. Extraction at 0400 hours. Clean, fast, and quiet. Any questions? There were none. His men were loyal, or perhaps just complicit. They saw the confidence, they saw the promise of action, and they didn't look too closely at the details. Greed, Alara noted in her log, was often disguised as duty. Then the crisis began. It started with a flicker. The massive central screen, displaying the live satellite feed of the target valley, stuttered. The image tore, pixels bleeding into static, before cutting to black. "What is this?" Rax roared, slamming his hand onto the table. "Get that feed back up!" The tech team scrambled. Fingers raced across keyboards, but the screens remained stubbornly dark. "It is the storm, sir," one of the technicians stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "An ionospheric disturbance. It is scrambling the uplink. We have lost eyes on the target." "This is nonsense," Rax shouted. "I do not care about the weather. Fix it, or I will find someone who can." The room descended into controlled chaos. Officers shouted into phones, technicians ran diagnostic protocols that returned only error messages. Rax paced like a caged tiger, his fury mounting with every passing second of blindness. In the corner, Alara stopped typing. She watched the frantic activity with a detached, analytical gaze. She saw the lead technician checking the software, checking the satellite alignment, checking the external connections, but he was missing the obvious. While Rax was screaming at a junior officer, Alara quietly stood up. She moved with a fluid, silent grace that went unnoticed in the turmoil. She walked to the edge of the main console table, where a tangle of cables ran down to the floor server banks. She spotted it immediately. A single fiber optic cable, black and slender, had been kicked loose. It was likely Rax himself, in one of his fits of performative rage, who had dislodged it with his boot. The connector was resting just millimeters from the port, severed enough to kill the feed, but close enough to look connected at a glance. Alara pulled a simple black hairpin from her bun. She didn't have a multi-tool. She didn't have a repair kit. She had what she carried. She dropped to one knee, pretending to retrieve a fallen pen. Under the cover of the table lip, she used the hairpin to depress the locking mechanism on the port, cleared a speck of dust from the cable head with her thumb, and snapped it back into place. The motion took less than 2 seconds. It was surgical, precise. Above her, the screen flickered. The static cleared. The image of the valley snapped back into razor-sharp focus. "We are back online," the technician shouted, relief flooding his voice. The signal just cleared up. Rax stopped pacing. He looked at the screen, then at his team, puffing out his chest. "See? You have to push these machines. You have to let them know who is in charge. That is how you get results. By yelling." He truly believed it. He believed his anger had intimidated the electrons into submission. Kyle, standing by the comms station, had seen everything. He saw the cable. He saw the hairpin. He saw Alara dust off her knees and return to her chair, her face a mask of boredom. He gave a microscopic nod, a gesture so small it was almost invisible, acknowledging the save. The tension in the room shifted, but did not break. The map was back, but the problem was just beginning. As the resolution sharpened, details of the target area became clear. It wasn't a fortified compound. It wasn't a training camp. Rax pointed to the center of the cluster. That is the primary objective, the main warehouse. We level that structure, we bury the opposition. Alara stared at her screen. She wasn't looking at the video feed. She was looking at the thermal analysis overlaid on her laptop. The heat signatures weren't showing weapons caches or military vehicles. They were showing people, lots of them. Small heat signatures. Families. "Those are civilian structures," Alara said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a knife. It was the first time she had spoken since the envelope comment, and the sound of her voice seemed to startle the men. Rax turned slowly, his boots squeaking on the polished floor. "What did you say, scribe?" "I said those are civilian structures," Alara repeated, her eyes locked on his. Target confirmation required, sir. The thermal profiles indicate non-combatants. Women, children, that is a village, not a base. Rax walked over to her. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. He loomed over her, using his height and bulk to intimidate. You are looking at a spreadsheet, he sneered. I am looking at the ground truth. My intel says that is a hostile compound, and my intel outweighs your opinion. Your intel is flawed, Alara said, holding her ground, or it is fabricated. The room gasped. To accuse a commander of fabricating intel was a career-ending move. It was insubordination of the highest order. Rax's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He reached out and grabbed the water bottle sitting on Alara's desk. He unscrewed the cap slowly, maintaining eye contact, and then deliberately poured the water into the trash can beside her leg. Thirsty work, isn't it? Typing all those lies? He asked, his voice low and menacing. He dropped the empty bottle onto her keyboard. Go get more, outside, and do not come back until you remember your place. It was a dismissal, a humiliation. He was treating her like a disobedient child. Alara looked at the water dripping into the bin. She looked at the empty bottle. She calculated the distance between her hand and his throat. She knew exactly how much pressure it would take to collapse his trachea. She knew 3 different ways to incapacitate him before he could draw the sidearm on his hip. But not yet. The mission parameters were strict. She needed him to commit. She needed the order on record. Rax saw her hesitation and mistook it for fear. He reached out, his hand moving toward her shoulder to shove her physically toward the door. Oops! A splash of hot liquid hit Rax's boots. He jumped back, cursing, as a dark stain spread across his pristine desert combat boots. Holy cow! My apologies, sir. Kale was there, holding an empty coffee mug, looking suitably mortified. The floor is slippery. I must have tripped. Rax glared at Kale, distracted from Alara. You clumsy idiot. Watch where you are stepping. I am so sorry, Commander. Let me get some towels. Kale moved between Rax and Alara, effectively breaking the physical confrontation. As he bent down to wipe the floor, he didn't look at Alara, but she saw the tension in his back. He was placing himself in the line of fire for her. Rax shook his head, disgusted. Useless. Everyone in this room is useless. He turned back to the main table, effectively forgetting about Alara for the moment. He had a war to start. We are wasting time, Rax announced. Weapons free. I want that target neutralized within the hour. Alara sat back down. She realized she couldn't wait any longer. If Rax launched the strike, innocent people would die, and the evidence of his theft would be buried under rubble. She needed to act. She opened a terminal window on her laptop. The screen turned black with green text. She initiated the Shadow Watch protocol. It was a high-level override, a digital key that would lock Rax out of the command system, but it required a direct uplink to the Pentagon Central Server to verify her authority. Connection establishing 20%. She needed time, 5 minutes. 5 minutes to upload the evidence of Rax's illegal order and authorize the override. Rax was busy shouting coordinates into the radio, but he was pacing again. He walked past her desk, stopped, and narrowed his eyes. He saw the scrolling code on her screen. You are not taking notes, are you? He asked, his voice dropping to a suspicious whisper. Who are you talking to? Alara minimized the window instantly, bringing up a blank document. Just organizing the files, sir? Rax didn't buy it. He was corrupt, but he wasn't stupid. He had survived this long by being paranoid. He grabbed the edge of her laptop screen and tilted it toward him. Organizing files? With encryption like that? I don't think so. He looked at the screen, then back at her. The suspicion in his eyes hardened into certainty. You are a mole. You are leaking my op. He didn't wait for an answer. He drew his sidearm, not pointing it at her, not yet, but holding it at his side, a clear and present threat. Cancel the uplink, he ordered. Now. I cannot do that, Alara said. Rax turned to his second-in-command, a burly man named Briggs. Briggs, get the connection cut. Physically. Briggs moved toward the server rack. If he pulled the hard line, Alara's upload would fail. The evidence would be lost. The strike would go ahead. Alara stood up. She slammed her laptop shut, severing the connection herself, but saving the data to the local drive. I am ordering you to stand down, Commander, she said. Her voice rang out, clear and authoritative, filling the room. "That is an illegal order. The target is civilians. The mission is compromised." The silence that followed was absolute. A scribe giving orders to a SEAL commander? It was unthinkable. Rax stared at her, his face contorted in disbelief that curled rapidly into rage. "You are ordering me? You? A nobody in a gray blazer?" He marched over to her. "You do not give orders. You take them." He reached out and grabbed her left wrist. His grip was like a vice, fingers digging into her skin, intending to drag her out of the room or break her arm. He didn't seem to care which. "You are done," Rax hissed. "I am going to throw you in the brig until you rot." He squeezed hard. Alara didn't pull away. She didn't struggle. She anchored her feet and let him pull. The force of his grip against her resistance put immense strain on the fabric of her cheap blouse. R.I.P. The seam of her left sleeve gave way. The fabric tore from the cuff up to the elbow, parting like a curtain. Rax looked down, ready to sneer at her disheveled state, but the sneer died on his lips. There, on the inner forearm of her pale skin, was a tattoo. It was stark, black ink, intricately detailed, a trident entwined with a golden eagle, and below it, the Greek letter Omega. Running through the center of the design was a jagged, raised scar, the kind left by a high-caliber bullet that had missed the bone by a millimeter. It was the mark of the DevGru Gold Squadron Omega element. The Ghost Squad, the unit that officially did not exist, the unit that had been wiped out in a classified operation in Kabul 10 years ago. Rax froze. His face drained of color, leaving him looking like a wax figure. His eyes widened, pupils dilating in pure, unadulterated shock. He knew that mark. He knew that scar. He had seen the after-action report. He had signed the death certificates. "Gold Squadron," he whispered, the words barely escaping his throat. "They all died in Kabul. You are a ghost." Alara ripped her arm free from his loosened grip. She stood tall, the shredded sleeve hanging from her arm, the tattoo a brand of defiance against the fluorescent lights. "I am the ghost you created, Rax," she said. Her voice was no longer the voice of a scribe. It was the voice of a commander who had walked through hell and come back for a reckoning. "When you sold our coordinates 10 years ago, when you traded our lives for a crate of gold." The room was spinning for Rax. The past he thought he had buried was standing in front of him, breathing, angry, and armed with the truth. He panicked. The logic of the situation evaporated, replaced by the primal instinct of a cornered animal. He raised his sidearm. "I will kill you again," he screamed. He leveled the gun at her chest, but Alara was faster, not with a weapon, but with the red envelope. She slammed it onto the table between them. The wax seal cracked. The envelope burst open. Inside the envelope lay a single document on heavy cream-colored paper. At the top, the presidential seal was embossed in gold. Below it, a signature in bold black ink. It was a writ of erasure, a document that legally declared a person stripped of all rank, rights, and citizenship within the context of a military tribunal. It was a kill order for a career, signed by the commander-in-chief. "Read it," Alara commanded. Rax glanced at the paper. His hand wavered. While his eyes were distracted, Alara reached into her other pocket. She didn't pull out a gun. She pulled out a card. It was thick, black metal, with a single magnetic strip running down the center. The Master Key card. The kind that overrides local command protocols and links directly to the Pentagon's war grid. She jammed the card into the console reader on the table. Ka-chunk. The lights in the war room died instantly. For a heartbeat, there was total darkness. Then, the emergency lighting kicked in. It wasn't amber. It wasn't white. It was red. Deep blood-soaked crimson that bathed the room in a nightmarish glow. On every screen, the satellite feed vanished. The maps vanished. In their place, a single message flashed in stark black letters against the red background. Protocol 66, command relieved. A siren began to wail, a low, thrumming sound that vibrated in the chest. The heavy blast doors at the entrance of the war room slammed shut. The magnetic locks engaged with a sound like a prison cell closing for the last time. Clang! Rax looked around wildly. His systems were locked out. His room was sealed. He was trapped in a red box with a ghost. "Mutiny!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "This is mutiny! Arrest her! Shoot her!" He waved his gun towards his men. "Briggs, Voss, take her down! That is a direct order!" The men hesitated. They looked at the red lights. They looked at the tattoo on Alara's arm. They looked at the presidential seal on the table. They were confused, terrified, paralyzed by conflicting realities. Rax realized he was losing them. He turned his gun back to Alara. "I will do it myself." He tightened his finger on the trigger. "Drop it!" The voice came from behind him. Rax spun around. Lieutenant Kale stepped out of the shadows. He had drawn his service weapon. He held it with a steady, two-handed grip, the barrel aimed directly at the center of Rax's forehead. "Stand down, traitor," Kale said. Rax stared at his comms officer. You? You are with her? You clumsy coffee-spilling idiot?" Kale didn't blink. "My father was your second in command, Rax. Major Thomas Coyle. You left him to die in that valley to make room for the gold on the extraction chopper." Rax's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I have been watching you for 5 years, Kyle continued. "I have logged every call, every bribe, every illegal order. I was waiting for the architect to return." He nodded toward Alara. Rax realized, with a dawning horror, that he was completely alone. The walls were closing in. The red light was judging him. Then, the sound of heavy machinery groaned through the walls. The magnetic locks on the main blast doors disengaged. The hydraulic pistons hissed. The doors slid open. Rax turned, expecting reinforcements, expecting his loyal security team to storm in and save him. Instead, 4 figures walked in. They were not base security. They were not MPs. They wore dress blues. Their chests were heavy with ribbons, and on their shoulders stars gleamed in the red light. 4 generals, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, flanked by a squad of military police who moved with the precision of machines. They walked into the room, their boots echoing in the silence. They did not look at Rax. They walked right past him as if he were a ghost, as if he had already ceased to exist. They walked straight to Alara. She stood amidst the chaos, her hair messy, her sleeve torn, her face dusted with confetti from the shredded report. She looked like a wreck. She looked like a warrior. The lead general, a 4-star officer with a face carved from granite, stopped in front of her. He looked at the tattoo. He looked at the red envelope. He snapped his heels together. Crack! He raised his hand in a crisp, slow salute. "Director Vance," the general said, his voice respectful and grave. "The Pentagon is ready for your briefing." "Director, not scribe, not lieutenant. Director." The other 3 generals saluted in unison. Rax let out a strangled sound. "Director! She is a scribe." 2 MPs grabbed Rax by the arms. They didn't ask him to come quietly. They kicked his legs out from under him, forced him to his knees, and zip-tied his hands behind his back. "You are under arrest for high treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and grand larceny," one of the MPs stated. Rax screamed as they dragged him away. He screamed about his rank, about his medals, about his gold. His voice faded down the corridor, a pathetic echo of a man who thought he was a god. Alara didn't watch him go. She looked at Kyle. She walked over to him. She reached out and touched the tattoo on her arm, then touched the badge on his chest. "Mission complete, Lieutenant," she said softly. Kyle lowered his gun. He holstered it. He looked at her, with eyes that were shiny with unshed tears. "For the fallen," he whispered. "For the fallen," Alara replied. Alara turned back to the table. She picked up her cheap plastic pen, the one Rax had mocked, the one she had dropped to fix the cable. She slid it into the pocket of her blazer. She turned and walked out of the war room, past the saluting generals, past the stunned operators, into the corridor where the lights were bright and white. A new commander was already stepping in to take over the console. The machine of war kept turning, but the rot had been cut out. The red lights faded. The heavy doors began to close behind her. Alara Vance walked toward the surface, toward the sun, leaving the darkness behind. The heavy steel doors of the war room sealed shut behind Alara Vance, muffling the chaotic sounds of a command structure collapsing in on itself. The silence of the corridor was absolute, a stark contrast to the storm she had just unleashed inside. She walked toward the exit, her boots clicking rhythmically on the linoleum, a metronome counting down the seconds of peace she had left. Beside her, Lieutenant Kale holstered his weapon. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the cold, hard reality of what they had just done. They hadn't just arrested a commander. They had declared war on a shadow network that had been festering inside the military for a decade. Alara stopped at the security checkpoint. The guards, young Marines who had undoubtedly heard the rumors flying through the base comms, stared at her. They saw the torn sleeve, the bruise blooming on her jaw, and the way she held herself, not like a scribe, but like a titan. They stepped aside without a word. Outside, the sun was blinding. The heat of the desert afternoon hit them like a physical blow. Alara took a breath, holding it for 4 counts, releasing it for 4. The air tasted of dust and jet fuel. "It is not over," Kyle said, his voice low. Rax was just the muscle. He didn't have the clearance to set up the gold smuggling routes alone. He had a sponsor. Alara reached into her pocket and pulled out the cheap plastic pen she had used to fix the fiber optic cable. She twirled it between her fingers. "I know," she replied. "Rax was a symptom. We need to cut out the infection." Her phone buzzed. It wasn't the standard military-issue device she had used as a prop for months. It was a burner, encrypted with algorithms she had written herself during sleepless nights in safe houses. A single text message appeared on the screen. "The Hydra knows one head is cut. The other 6 are looking for you. Run." Alara showed the screen to Kyle. He read it and frowned. "Who sent this?" "Someone who wants to stay alive," Alara said. She crushed the phone under her boot, grinding the electronics into the asphalt. "We are not running, Lieutenant. We are hunting." They moved toward the motor pool. Alara didn't head for the civilian sedan she had arrived in. That car would be rigged by now, a bomb wired to the ignition or a tracker welded to the chassis. Instead, she walked straight to a black unmarked SUV with government plates. She pulled the master keycard from her blazer, the same card that had locked down the war room, and swiped it against the driver's side door panel. The lock clicked open. "Get in," she ordered. Kyle slid into the passenger seat. "Where are we going, Director?" Alara started the engine. It purred with the sound of a reinforced, armored engine block. "We are going to visit the man who signed Rax's performance reviews for the last 5 years. The man who buried the investigation into my team's death." "General Thorne?" Kyle asked, his eyes widening. "He is untouchable. He sits on the Defense Appropriations Committee. No one is untouchable, KL. They just have thicker walls. And I have a very large hammer." As the SUV peeled out of the base, leaving the confusion of Coronado behind, Ilara's mind raced. Rax had been stealing gold, yes, but gold is heavy. Gold is hard to move. You don't steal gold to get rich. You steal gold to fund something off the books, something that requires untraceable currency. Rax wasn't building a retirement fund. He was funding an army. 2 days later, the safe house, a shipping container converted into a living space buried under a scrapyard in the Nevada desert, smelled of rust and old oil, but it was shielded from satellite thermal imaging and completely off the grid. Alara sat at a makeshift desk, surrounded by monitors. She hadn't slept in 30 hours. Her jaw throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, a reminder of Rax's fist. On the screens, streams of data cascaded like digital waterfalls. She was dissecting Rax's digital footprint. The red envelope she had slammed on the table contained the warrant, but the real weapon was the data she had extracted from the war room servers during the lockdown. She found it in a subfolder labeled Logistics Maintenance. It wasn't a maintenance log, it was a ledger, payment transfers, weapons shipments, personnel movements. Kyle walked in, carrying 2 mugs of black coffee. He set one down next to her hand. "You need to rest, Alara. You are running on fumes." "I will rest when Thorne is in handcuffs," she muttered, taking a sip. "Look at this." She pointed to a line of code. Rax was shipping the gold to a shell company in Zurich, but the company isn't buying yachts. They are buying components, guidance chips, uranium centrifuges, long-range ballistic casings. Kyle leaned in. "That is nuclear tech. Why would a corrupt SEAL commander want nuclear tech?" "He doesn't," Alara said. "He is just the courier. Thorne is building something he calls Project Obsidian." She tapped a key, bringing up a map of the globe. A red dot pulsed in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, an uncharted island. Officially, it is a naval bombing range. Unofficially, according to this ledger, it is a manufacturing facility. "They are building a weapon," Kale whispered. "They are building a deterrent," Ilara corrected. "Thorne believes the current administration is too soft. He wants a private nuclear option, a way to dictate foreign policy without oversight." It was madness. It was treason on a scale that made Rax's gold theft look like petty shoplifting. "We have to transmit this to the Pentagon," Kale said. "We can't," Ilara replied. "Thorne has eyes in the Pentagon. If we send this data through standard channels, it will be intercepted and we will be erased before the upload is complete. We need to deliver it in person, to the one man Thorne can't bribe, the Secretary of Defense, higher. Kale stared at her. You want to walk into the White House? I want to walk into the G20 summit, Ilara said. The summit was taking place in Los Angeles in 48 hours. Every world leader, including the president, would be there, and so would General Thorne, acting as the chief security advisor. It is a fortress, Ilara. The Secret Service, the Marines, local police. We will never get within a mile of that building. Ilara turned to him. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. We don't need to break in, Lieutenant. We have invitations. She pulled up a file on the screen. It was a list of security contractors vetted for the event. One of the companies, Aegis Solutions, was a subsidiary of the shell company Rax had been using. Rax was supposed to lead the security detail for the summit, Ilara explained. That is why he was stealing the gold, to pay off the mercenaries he was going to insert into the Secret Service perimeter. Kael understood immediately. You want to take his place. I want to finish his mission, Ilara said. But instead of protecting Thorne, we are going to expose him on live television. By the time the sun set on the day of the summit, the Los Angeles Convention Center had become a fortress of steel and glass, surrounded by 3 rings of concrete barriers and enough firepower to invade a small country. Ilara stood in the staging area, wearing a black tactical uniform with the Aegis Solutions patch on her shoulder. She had dyed her hair black and used makeup to cover the bruising on her jaw. She looked like just another private security contractor, anonymous, capable, and dangerous. Kale stood beside her, checking his earpiece. He looked nervous, but his hands were steady. We are clear, he murmured. The ID badges Rax forged worked. We are in the system as Team Alpha. Good, Ilara said. Remember the plan? You take the control room, loop the camera feeds. I need 10 minutes with the president. 10 minutes is an eternity, Ilara. The Secret Service will shoot you the second you step out of the zone. Then I better be fast. They moved out. The hallways were buzzing with activity. Diplomats in expensive suits hurried past grim-faced security guards. Ilara moved with the flow of traffic, her eyes scanning for threats. She spotted Thorne almost immediately. He was standing on a balcony overlooking the main atrium, surrounded by a phalanx of aides. General Thorne was a man who looked like he had been born in a uniform. Tall, silver-haired, with a face that radiated absolute authority. He was shaking hands with a foreign dignitary, smiling the smile of a man who owns the future. Ilara felt a cold rage settle in her stomach. This man had signed the order that sent her team into an ambush. He had watched 10 good men die just to cover up his slush fund. She touched the earpiece. I have visuals on the target. Copy, Kale whispered. I am at the server room. Breaching in 3, 2, 1. The lights in the hallway flickered. Just for a second. It was enough. The electronic lock on the service stairwell disengaged. Ilara slipped inside, moving upward. She climbed 3 flights of stairs, her breathing steady. 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out. On the 4th floor, she exited into the VIP corridor. This was the inner sanctum. The president was in a holding room at the end of the hall, preparing for his keynote speech. 2 Secret Service agents stood guard outside the door. They were big, serious men with earpieces and hands hovering near their jackets. Ilara walked toward them. She didn't sneak. She walked with purpose, holding a clipboard she had swiped from a logistics desk downstairs. Classification check, she announced, not slowing down. We have a sensor malfunction in the president's suite. I need to sweep the room. The agent stepped in her path. Stop right there. We didn't request a sweep. Ilara didn't blink. That is because the sensor is passive. It picked up a chemical signature consistent with ricin. Unless you want the president to inhale a neurotoxin in 5 minutes, you will let me pass. It was a lie, of course, but it was a specific, terrifying lie designed to trigger their training protocols. Ricin, chemical threat, immediate action required. The agents exchanged a look. One reached for his radio. I am calling it in. You do that, Ilara said. And while you are waiting for confirmation, the air scrubbers are cycling the toxin into the room. It is your call. Fear is a powerful motivator. The agent hesitated. Go. Quick scan. 1 minute. Ilara nodded and pushed past them. She opened the door and stepped inside. The room was empty of threats, but full of power. The President of the United States sat on a leather sofa, reviewing his speech notes. He looked up, surprised. Who are you? Ilara locked the door behind her. She dropped the clipboard. Mr. President, my name is Director Ilara Vance, and I am here to report a coup." The president stood up. His face hardened. "Director Vance, you are listed as KIA. I was, sir, until 3 days ago." She reached into her vest. The Secret Service agents outside were pounding on the door now. "Open up! Breach! Breach!" Alara pulled out the red envelope, the original one, stained with the sweat of the war room. She placed it on the coffee table. "General Thorne is running a shadow operation called Project Obsidian. He is using stolen gold to fund a private nuclear arsenal. The evidence is on this drive." She placed a flash drive next to the envelope. The door splintered. The agents were kicking it in. Alara raised her hands. "I am unarmed, Mr. President. I am surrendering to you." The door flew open. 4 agents burst in, guns drawn. "Get down! On the ground! Now!" Alara dropped to her knees, interlacing her fingers behind her head. She looked at the president. "Read the drive, sir, before Thorne starts World War III." The agents swarmed her, pinning her to the carpet. One of them pressed a gun barrel to the back of her neck. "Wait!" the president ordered. The room froze. The president picked up the drive. He looked at Alara, trapped under the weight of his protectors. "Stand her up." "Sir, she is a threat." "Stand her up. That is an order." The agents pulled Alara to her feet. She straightened her uniform, her face calm. The president plugged the drive into his secure tablet. He scrolled through the files, the ledger, the maps, the communications logs between Thorne and the rogue scientists. His face went pale. This is treason." "It is, sir. And Thorne is outside right now, waiting for you to take the stage so he can initiate the next phase." "What phase?" Alara looked at the clock. "He is going to create an emergency, a false flag attack on the summit to justify activating his private arsenal. He wants to be the hero who saves the day with his new weapons." The president looked at the Secret Service lead. "Secure General Thorne," quietly. "I don't want to panic." "Yes, Mr. President," but it was too late. A deafening explosion rocked the building. The floor lurched violently. Dust poured from the ceiling vents. The alarms began to scream. "He started it early," Alara shouted over the noise. Kael's voice crackled in her ear. "Alara, they blew the power grid. The exits are sealed. Thorne's mercenaries are locking down the atrium. They are taking hostages." Alara looked at the president. "Sir, you need to get to the bunker." "No," the president said, his eyes steel. "If I run, he wins. Can you stop him?" Alara checked her watch. She had no weapon, no backup, and a building full of hostiles. "Yes, sir, I can." She turned to the Secret Service agents. "Give me a weapon." The lead agent hesitated, then handed her his backup piece, a Sig Sauer P229. "Good luck, Director." Alara took the gun. She checked the chamber. Luck is for people who don't have a plan. She sprinted out of the room, heading for the atrium. The main hall of the convention center was a scene from a nightmare. Smoke billowed from a crater in the center of the floor. Hundreds of dignitaries were cowering on the ground. Around the perimeter, heavily armed men in unmarked tactical gear, Thorne's Aegis mercenaries, stood guard. On the balcony, General Thorne stood with a microphone. He looked like a savior amidst the chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are under attack by terrorist forces. I have assumed command of the security protocols. We are locking down for your protection." It was a masterful lie. He was holding the world hostage and telling them he was their shield. Alara moved through the shadows of the upper mezzanine. She needed to get to Thorne, but there were 6 mercenaries between her and the general. "Kael," she whispered, "I need a distraction. I am locked in the server room, Alara. They are cutting through the door. I have maybe 30 seconds. That is all I need. Kill the lights. I can't. They hardline the emergency power, then overload the fire suppression system." There was a pause. Then the sound of furious typing. "This is going to get wet." Kawoosh. The sprinkler system activated. Not a drizzle, but a deluge. Thousands of gallons of water hammered down into the atrium. The mercenaries looked up, confused, their visors obscured by the spray. Alara moved. She vaulted over the railing, dropping 10 feet onto an unsuspecting guard. She drove her knee into his chest, knocking the wind out of him, and rolled to her feet. 2 mercenaries turned toward her. She fired twice. Double tap. Center mass. They dropped. She wasn't fighting like a scribe now. She was fighting like the commander of Gold Squadron. Every movement was efficient violence. She disarmed a 3rd guard, using his body as a shield against incoming fire from the balcony. Thorne saw her. His composure cracked. "Kill her!" He screamed into his mic, "Focus fire on the mezzanine!" Bullets chewed up the concrete around her. Alara dove behind a marble pillar. She was pinned. She checked her magazine. 4 rounds left. 6 hostiles remaining plus Thorn. The math didn't work. She needed an equalizer. She looked at her wrist. The tattoo throbbed under her sleeve. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the master key card, the one she had retrieved from the war room. It wasn't just a key for the base. It was a universal override for any system linked to the DoD network. And Thorn's mercenaries were using military-grade comms. She jammed the card into a data port on the wall. It was a long shot, a Hail Mary. "Override Protocol Omega," she shouted into the port, hoping the voice recognition software was active. "Execute command frequency shutdown." For a second, nothing happened. The bullets kept flying. Then, a high-pitched screech erupted from every speaker in the building. It was the sound of a digital death scream. The mercenaries clutched their helmets, ripping them off as the feedback loop shattered their earpieces. They were deafened, disoriented. Alara stepped out from the pillar. She didn't fire. She walked. She walked past the writhing guards, straight toward the stairs leading to the balcony. Thorn was fumbling with his own earpiece, his face twisted in pain. He saw Alara coming. He drew his dress pistol, a ceremonial Beretta with pearl grips. He leveled it at her. You were supposed to be dead." Alara didn't stop. "I am dead, General. That is why you can't kill me." Thorn fired. The bullet sparked off the railing inches from her hip. His hand was shaking. He fired again. Wide. Alara reached the top of the stairs. She was 10 feet away from him. "It is over, Thorn. The President has the drive. The world knows." Thorn laughed, a frantic, broken sound. "The world believes what I tell them. I have the bomb. I have the trigger." He pulled a device from his pocket. A detonator. One press, and the facility on the island launches a warhead. I will burn it all down before I let you take me. He put his thumb on the button. Alara stopped. She was too far away to reach him. "Do it," she said softly. Thorn blinked. "What?" "Press it. See what happens." Thorn sneered. "You think I won't?" He pressed the button. Nothing happened. No explosion, no siren, just the silence of a failed connection. He pressed it again, and again. Why? Why isn't it working? "Because," Alara said, taking the final step toward him. "While you were giving your speech, Lieutenant Kael wasn't just turning on the sprinklers. He was rerouting your uplink to a dead server." Thorn stared at the detonator in horror. Alara grabbed his wrist, the same way Rax had grabbed hers, but this time, the grip was iron. "You forgot the first rule of command, General." She twisted his wrist. The detonator clattered to the floor. "Never trust technology more than you trust your people." She swept his legs, slamming him onto the wet floor of the balcony. She placed her boot on his chest, pinning him. She pulled out her cheap plastic pen. She clicked it open, and she pressed the tip against his forehead. "Bang," she whispered. The doors to the atrium burst open, but it wasn't mercenaries. It was the Marines. Hundreds of them, in full combat gear, streaming into the hall. At the front was the President, flanked by the Secret Service. Thorn looked up at the President, then at Alara. I did this for the country," he sputtered. "No," the President said, looking down from the lower floor. "You did it for yourself." Marines swarmed the balcony. They hauled Thorn to his feet. He was soaked, disheveled, stripped of his dignity. As they dragged him away, he screamed at Alara. "Who are you? Who are you really?" Alara straightened her blazer. She smoothed her hair. "I am just the scribe," she said. 3 days later, the Pentagon briefing room was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Alara stood at the podium. Her uniform was pressed, her stars gleaming on her shoulders. She was no longer hiding. Across from her sat the Joint Chiefs, and in the back of the room, standing at attention, was Lieutenant Kael. He had been promoted to commander. "We have dismantled the Obsidian network," Alara reported. "Thorn is in federal supermax. Rax is cooperating in exchange for a life sentence instead of the death penalty. The gold has been returned to the Treasury." The chairman of the Joint Chiefs nodded. "You have done a great service to this nation, Director Vance. But you have exposed yourself. The world knows who you are now. You can never go back to the shadows." Alara looked at her tattoo. She traced the scar with her thumb. "I don't need the shadows anymore, sir." "Why is that?" "Because the shadows are where men like Thorn hide. I plan to stand in the light, and I dare them to come for me." The chairman smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Then we will stand with you." He stood up and extended his hand. "Welcome back to the living, Alara." Alara shook his hand. It felt solid, real. She walked out of the briefing room, KL falling into step beside her. "So," KL asked, "what now? We are unemployed." Alara laughed. It was a sound she hadn't made in years. Light, free. "Unemployed? We just cleaned the house, Kael. Now we have to redecorate." She handed him a folder. It was blue this time. "What is this? New orders." "There are 12 more bases with irregularities in their logistics logs. 12 more commanders who think they are untouchable." Kael groaned, but he was smiling. "So, back to being the janitor?" Alara pulled out a new pen. "A nice one this time. Metal." "No. This time, we go in as auditors." They walked down the long corridor of the Pentagon, their footsteps echoing in unison. Justice isn't a destination, Alara thought. It's a habit. It's the daily choice to hold the line when no one else will. She touched the tattoo on her arm one last time. Gold Squadron Lives. Hit subscribe to honor the quiet heroes among us. She pushed open the double doors and walked out into the world, ready for the next war. The air outside the Pentagon tasted different. For 10 years, Alara had breathed the stale, recycled air of deception, hiding in ventilation shafts, crouching in supply closets, sitting in the back of briefing rooms while lesser men made fatal mistakes. Now, the wind whipping across the Potomac smelled of ozone and gasoline, sharp and clean. It smelled of truth. A black government SUV idled at the curb, its engine purring with the quiet menace of a sleeping panther. Kael held the rear door open, his demeanor shifting seamlessly from the deference of a subordinate to the easy familiarity of a partner. He was no longer the clumsy communications officer spilling coffee to create distractions. He was Commander Kael, the man who had held a gun to a traitor's head and didn't blink. "You know the element of surprise is gone," Kael said as he climbed into the driver's seat. The rearview mirror caught his eyes, dark and serious. Rax was arrogant. He didn't think anyone was watching. The next 12? They will know the auditor is coming. They will be scrubbing their servers before we even clear the airspace. Alara opened the blue folder on her lap. The paper was crisp, the ink fresh. It contained the logistics data for Fort Kalis, a sprawling supply depot in the Pacific Northwest. "Let them scrub," Alara replied, her finger tracing a column of fuel requisition numbers that didn't add up. "You can delete emails, Kale. You can shred manifests. But you can't erase the void where resources used to be. Corruption always leaves a vacuum. We just have to find the empty space." She looked out the window as the SUV merged onto the highway, heading toward Andrews Air Force Base. The world blurred past. Commuters, tourists, civilians, living lives completely detached from the shadow war she had just ignited. They saw the uniform and assumed safety. They didn't see the rot eating the foundation. Rax was a symptom of a disease that thrived in darkness, she murmured, almost to herself. "Now we are turning on the lights. The roaches are going to scatter. Are you ready for the chase?" Kael asked. Alara touched the inside of her left wrist. The fabric of her new dress uniform was stiff, concealing the tattoo and the scar that ran through it. Gold Squadron. The memory of the ambush in Kabul was no longer haunting. It was a fuel source. "I am not chasing them, Kael. I am hurting them." The jet was a flying command center, a far cry from the cargo holds and commercial economy seats Alara had grown accustomed to. She sat at a mahogany table, the blue folder spread out before her. Kael sat opposite, reviewing satellite reconnaissance of Fort Kalis. "General Sterling," Kael read from a tablet. "Base commander, decorated in Desert Storm, Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts. He runs Kalis like a personal fiefdom." The audit flags show a 20% discrepancy in aviation fuel reserves over the last 18 months. "That is millions of dollars," Alara noted. "You don't lose that much fuel to evaporation." "He is selling it," Kael surmised. "Off the books, probably to private contractors operating in the gray zones." Alara nodded. "It is less flashy than gold bullion, but it is smarter. Fuel is consumable. It disappears. It is harder to track than bars of metal. Sterling is not Rax. He isn't a cowboy. He is a logistician. He will have paperwork to cover every drop." "Then how do we catch him?" "We don't look for the fuel," Alara said, closing the folder. "We look for the money. Sterling is smart, but he has an ego. Men like that always buy something they can't afford. A house, a car, a debt they need to clear." She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The rhythm of the engines hummed through the fuselage. "You miss it, don't you?" KL asked quietly. "Miss what?" "Being invisible. Being the scribe." Alara opened her eyes. She looked at the pen in her pocket, the metal one she had taken from the Pentagon. It felt heavy. There was safety in the furniture, she admitted. When you are a nobody, people say things in front of you that they would never say to a director. They reveal their true selves because they don't think you matter. Now when you walk in, the walls go up, Kyle finishes. They will see the rank. They will see the reputation. They will lie to your face with a smile. Exactly right, Ilara said, which means I have to be better. I have to hear what they don't say. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Director Vance, Commander, we are beginning our descent into McCord Field. The weather is overcast with light rain. Ground transport is waiting." Alara straightened her jacket. She checked her reflection in the darkened window. The woman staring back wasn't the disheveled survivor who had walked out of the Coronado war room. She was sharp, polished, and dangerous. "Let's go say hello to General Sterling," she said. The rain in Washington was different from the desert heat. It was a cold, soaking drizzle that turned the world gray. Alara stepped out of the car, ignoring the umbrella offered by a nervous young corporal. Kyle fell into step beside her, his eyes scanning the perimeter with the habit of a protector. The base was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that happens when the order has gone out to lock down and shut up. They walked into the lobby. A sergeant major stood behind the desk, his face a mask of polite obstruction. "Director Vance," the sergeant major said, not saluting. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow. General Sterling is currently in a closed session with his staff. He cannot be disturbed." Alara didn't stop walking. She reached the desk and placed her hand flat on the polished wood. She didn't slam it. She didn't shout. She just leaned in, invading his space with absolute calm. "Sergeant, I am not a dinner guest. I do not need a reservation, and General Sterling is not in a closed session. He is in his office, shredding documents because his perimeter sensors alerted him to my plane's tail number 20 minutes ago." The sergeant major blinked, his composure cracking. "Ma'am, I have my orders." "And now you have new ones," Kyle said, stepping forward. His voice was low, carrying the weight of a man who had stared down a barrel and lived. "Step aside, Sergeant, unless you want to be listed as an accessory to conspiracy in the indictment." The threat wasn't loud, but it was heavy. The sergeant major looked from Kyle to Alara. He saw the way they stood, not like bureaucrats, but like operators. He swallowed hard and stepped back. "Room 404, top floor." "Thank you," Alara said. They took the stairs, bypassing the elevator. Elevators could be stopped. The stairs were honest. When they reached the 4th floor, the hallway was empty. At the end of the corridor, a single heavy oak door stood closed. A brass nameplate read, "General A. Sterling." Alara didn't knock. She turned the handle, locked. She looked at Kyle. He nodded. He didn't draw a weapon. They weren't at that stage yet. Instead, he pulled a small tool from his pocket, a tension wrench and a rake pick. It took him 4 seconds. Click. Alara pushed the door open. The office was large, lined with bookshelves and smelling of expensive cigar smoke. General Sterling stood by a sophisticated shredder in the corner, feeding a stack of papers into its maw. He froze as the door swung open. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been chiseled from granite. He didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. "You have a lot of nerve barging in here," Sterling growled, not moving away from the shredder. "This is a secure facility, and that is a high-capacity cross-cut shredder," Alara observed, walking into the room. She glanced at the pile of confetti on the floor. It reminded her of racks, of the paper rain in the war room, but this wasn't mockery. This was panic disguised as housekeeping. "You are Director Vance," Sterling said, dusting his hands off. "The ghost. I heard about your show at Coronado. Very theatrical. But this isn't Coronado, and I am not Rax. I don't leave loose ends." "No," Alara said, stopping in front of his desk. "You leave fuel deficits." 20%, General. That is hard to hide," Sterling laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Accounting errors. Supply chain friction. You can't prove intent." "I don't need to prove intent to freeze your assets," Alara said. "I just need probable cause. And the fact that you are destroying logs the moment I arrive, that is the probable cause." She pulled the blue folder from under her arm and tossed it onto his desk. It landed with a heavy thud. Protocol Red is active for this base, General. Your command codes have been suspended. Your financial records are being mirrored by the Treasury Department as we speak. And that shredder? She pointed to the machine humming in the corner. We will piece it back together. Every single strip. Sterling's eyes narrowed. He walked around the desk, looming over her. He was trying to use his size, his rank, his history to push her back. You think you can just walk in here and dismantle my command? I have friends in Washington. Powerful friends. Alara didn't flinch. She held his gaze, her green eyes cold and sharp. I know, General, I am counting on it. Because when you fall, they are going to panic. And when they panic, they make mistakes. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed with the authority of the grave. I am not just here for the fuel. I am here for the network. And you are just the first domino. Sterling stared at her. For the first time, the annoyance in his eyes was replaced by something else. Recognition. He realized he wasn't dealing with an auditor. He was dealing with a hunter. Kale stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He took out his phone and tapped the screen. The shredder stopped humming. The lights on Sterling's computer tower went dark. The digital clock on the wall froze. Power cut to this office, Kale announced calmly. We are now in a sanitized environment. Alara sat down in one of the leather guest chairs. She crossed her legs and pulled out her metal pen. She clicked it open. Sit down, General, she said. We have a lot of paperwork to go through, and I suggest you stop shredding. It makes you look guilty. Sterling looked at the dead shredder, then at Kale blocking the door, and finally at Alara. He slowly sank into his chair, the fight draining out of him as he realized the walls had already closed in. Alara opened her notebook. She wrote the date at the top of the page. Fort Kalis, Audit Day 1. She looked up at Sterling and smiled. A smile that promised justice, cold and absolute. Shall we begin?